go ahead and shift gears so we can talk about these kettlebells. And just like to welcome everybody to Kettlebell Corner today. Our guest is Coach Chris Abbott. He's on the Breakthrough Secrets podcast. He's the host. And I have a feeling we're going to be getting into the snatch a lot today. At least I have a lot of questions, and I'm pretty sure Roger does. And this guy specializes in the snatch, as you mentioned earlier. One of his coaches is Tim Almond, and we know he's big in the snatch. Let's go ahead and get started without any further ado. Chris, why don't you give us like a 15-second story of your life or what you're about, and then Roger will kick off some questions.
Oh man, 15-second story of my life. Basically, let's see. I was an athlete pretty much most of my life. Wanted to get involved with strength training at an early age, at like pro sport level, realized that wasn't going to happen. Started off my career in LA as a personal trainer at Equinox. Quickly, they've got a good culture of continuing education there. That kind of got my continuing education bug in me early. And make a long story short, left there after a few years of kind of working my way to the top. Was a personal trainer in LA for 8 years, six years on my own. And then opened a kettlebell studio here in Saratoga Springs in 2017. Had a lot of success with that, which is great. COVID, did its thing to every gym owner in the country, and we went remote. And actually, I just closed the studio down a couple months ago, and everything is now full remote. I've been with Strong First specifically since 2016. I think that's probably about as short as I can make it.
Okay,
sweet.
Well,
I love it. Perfect.
Before we get more, we like to talk. We like to talk details. Make sure you Jeremiah mentioned your podcast. I'm sure people will learn a lot about you through that. Definitely check that out. There's some good stuff there. So let's talk about the snatch. It's right on your Instagram bio. Let's talk about your specific style. Because there are some differences. How would you describe it? What are some differences for people who don't understand these differences? And then let's kind of dive in and talk about pros and cons, etc.
Yeah. So I think it's worth mentioning. When I'd reached out to Tim Almond over a year ago. I was like, hey man, I want to master the snatch. Like for me personally, it's an exercise. Obviously, as you guys know, kettlebell enthusiasts, like most bang for your buck. In my opinion, from an advanced minimalist standpoint, it's all you got to do, right? I've got 3 kids, business, like I want bang for my buck. So up to that point, I was snatching pretty much like I'd been taught, which is more of a swing, high pull kind of finish over top type thing. And Tim's method is not that. It utilizes the low pull, which is kind of more like clean. But I think what I liked most about my experience over the last, now it's been 15, 16 months or so, is kind of detaching myself from any sort of outcome and really focusing on mastering the skill. So if I were to put one kind of like definitive difference between maybe the way I snatch and the way some other people snatch, it is more like a clean that finishes overhead versus more like a swing that finishes overhead. There is much more of an intention of a vertical projection of force, even though obviously the snatch is a vertical movement. There are a lot of people who snatch with still more of a horizontal projection concept, and the bell ends up getting way out in front of them, right? Kind of have this huge arcing movement. So I would say from like a technical standpoint, that is the biggest thing. And to me, now I don't like to overcomplicate things. Once you have a really good feel for that low pull and taming the arc, there are some intricacies you can get into with grip and breath and all that kind of stuff. But to me, the biggest difference is the low pull versus more of a higher pull up here. And it's an early insertion and punching through in the bell. There are some differences that people will find just in practicing the low pull in terms of weights. I think Tim would be the first to admit that he definitely contributed to people snatching heavy bells and trying to get to the point where they're snatching heavy bells, maybe prematurely. And I think when you practice the low pull method effectively, you'll have to bell down. You'll have to use lighter weights because you truly are powering from the hips, and basically from the waist up, the bell is just floating. You have pulled it and it is just guiding right up. which we all, I think, know in theory is what should happen, right? But I think in practicality, a lot of times, especially just from seeing some videos on Instagram and whatnot from people, it does get way out here, and it's just a different feel. It's a different movement. But again, I would say the low pull is what you're looking at is like the main difference, so to speak.
Okay, so let's talk about that. One, I want to throw out the idea that most people these days are doing some version of the low pull, whether they realize it or not. Tim was really instrumental in calling that out. I saw a coach not that long ago who was talking about pulling, I believe, at the level of the chest. That was the instruction. You got to pull at the level of the chest. And I watched this coach snatch, and sure enough, that pull came right around the level of the waist, right around the level of the belly button. So even when people are describing it wrong, even when they're saying, "Hey, this is what we're doing," if you have any sort of instinct to keep the bell close, you're doing some version of a low pull, whether you realize it or not. But let's talk about, so if I'm using my active listening appropriately, we've already talked about a different movement trajectory. So we're looking at a lot more vertical. So obviously, if you're going to get a kettlebell from the ground overhead, you have to have some horizontal. It's going back between your legs. There's some. Yep. Let's get into what you think the advantages are of a low pull versus more of a traditional. We were both taught, which really screwed us up. We were taught a snatch is a swing that ends overhead. And when I
was taught the same way.
Yeah. My arm almost fell off. It was awful. Lots of tears, lots of frustration. And then we realized we needed to stop listening to what people were telling us and kind of figure it out on our own. But let's talk about some of the what do you think are the main advantages?
So I think a few things with the low pull technique, and specifically to really do the low pull well, you're going to get a super deep grip in the bell. I might be able to show you guys here. Actually, one of our guests gave us these kids bells, which are actually kind of cool. They're actually kids competition bells. So obviously, high up here in the palm, right when you finish, but getting that grip from the onset. So I actually developed a callus that's pretty low in my palm right here. When you keep the bell in the low pull position, or when you're using the low pull, you naturally keep it deep in your hand. It's a stronger grip versus like how I was taught. I usually hooked the grip, the bell with my fingertips, hiked the bell back, and would close my thumb naturally, right? So from the onset, you just have a stronger feeling, okay? But when you go ahead and actually do the low pull, it is a faster movement, in my opinion, because the bell is actually taking less there's less distance to travel than when it travels out and up, which is what most people will do when they're doing that high pull kind of technique where it's a swing that finishes overhead, right? So in my opinion, it can be more explosive. It's a faster movement, but it's also just overall more controlled. So you got to think when you're doing a really good job of taming the arc, which, as you said, Roger, if you're doing a good job of taming the arc, you pretty much are doing a low pull. Otherwise, how are you taming the arc, right?
Sure.
But I think with your intention around that, it does become a bit more powerful. It becomes a bit more explosive. I can tell you that my own strength and power from practicing the low pull with intention for a year was night and day different from just swinging heavy bells for the previous 5 years. And I think it really does come from that intention of sometimes I might even cue myself to snatch to my hips. And that is cueing me to insert my hand quickly and be very explosive with my hips to punch through and, tame that bell, punch through. So I do think from a speed and power standpoint, there are benefits to doing more of the low pull. I guess if you were, a snatch is getting the bell from the ground to over your head, right? Mm-hmm. So you can do that a lot of different ways. You can do it with a high pull, you can do it with a low pull, you can do it with a sport style, right? If you're going to do that as quickly as possible, then you want that to, a dumbbell snatch would be the prime example of just a straight line, straight up, right? Sure. I think there's definitely, though, an advantage in power and speed applying the low pull. And I think it's probably, honestly, more of an accurate expression of the kettlebell hardstyle snatch. Obviously, I speak to a lot of guys in the podcast who are in the sport world, so I've learned to also, not just saying kettlebell snatch in general. You can snatch a kettlebell a lot of different ways, right?
Sure. I want to point something out. So I think Chris is being polite and diplomatic. When we get into physics, which is what governs all of this stuff, there is no doubt that the low pull super close snatch provides a significant power advantage. It is much faster when you look at all of the equations, any way you slice it. The same person using two different techniques will exert a significant amount more power using a low pull, keeping that arc as tame as possible. It is physically impossible to be otherwise. Now, that doesn't mean, like you said, that you can't snatch a kettlebell another way, but then you have this trade-off between power and efficiency. You have different training outcomes. Are you trying to train for power? Are you trying to train for strength? Are you trying to train for endurance? Whatever that is, you can play with your different modalities. But no question at all that the low pull offers a significant advantage in power 100% every time. There's not going to be any deviation. So let's make that a little more emphatic as it relates to hardstyle. So I'll be the jerk and be.
No, it's a good point, Roger.
Surprise,
and honestly,
surprise.
I think it's worth mentioning too that, to me, I'm not going to name his name, but a Strong First master instructor, former, he's not with them anymore. At one point, this was a while ago, I was doing a recert, and he didn't like my snatches. He said I had too much knee bend, and he basically wanted me to do like a full hip hinge with very minimal knee bend. And I'm like, dude, I'm sorry, that's just not, to me, that is a weaker position to get this bell over my head. This is a vertical movement. You want me to basically turn this into a hinge and get the bell directly over my head just using my hips? Like, I'm sorry. Like, I always think of it as a standpoint of I can jump pretty high. I've always been able to jump pretty high naturally. So I do like to use my knees. If I kind of go down as if I'm about to do a vertical jump and I look down, where are my knees? There's definitely a knee bend. There's definitely hips as well. But if I want to explode upwards, I'm going to allow my knees to come forward more. Not past my toes, right? If I'm going to do an all-out vertical jump, max height, yes, they're going to come past my toes. I don't want them to come that far, but I think if you apply that to what you're saying here, Roger, with the low pull, to me, it just is a natural vertical movement, which is what the snatch is. It's not a horizontal movement. There is horizontal hip movement, but the movement is a vertical movement, right?
Yeah, no question. Can I go again, Jeremiah?
Yeah, go for it.
Exciting me.
Yeah, just go, buddy.
Sorry, I'm getting moist. So when we talk about what we're talking about the snatch, it's appropriate. So when we're talking about the differences between horizontal and vertical, we do have to talk about hips and knees. And I had a quick exchange with Chris the other day on Instagram about sequencing. And one, I do want to point out that not everybody, we're to be clear on the same page. We don't teach the let's say hinge dominant version of a snatch. We don't even use hinge. I don't think a swing is a hinge. I don't think a snatch is a hinge. I think a hinge is a movement pattern. But when you start to confuse, a swing is a swing, a snatch is a snatch. And when you start to confuse them and start using these other labels, you start getting all kinds of horrible, a swing is a fast deadlift. It's not. You start to get all this confusion. So we really let people's bodies determine the form. So, you look at someone like Jeremiah, he's going to have less hip in his snatch than he is in his swing. But he's going to have more hip in his snatch than I am because he's got long legs and a short torso, and I have a long torso and shorter legs. So we're gonna let that kind of play out. So we do want to get vertical. I do think it's important to point out that some people don't have the same ability to get as vertical as others. So once you get into anthropometry, some people are just rock stars when it comes to the squat. They're just able to produce a tremendous amount of vertical force. So we tend to let people's body types dictate how far they get back, but we do make sure that the snatch is more knee dominant because it's a simple matter of trajectory. Why are you going to fire the bell way back, shoot it forward as fast and as far as possible just to pull it back and bring it overhead? It's not efficient and it's less powerful. So I definitely dig that. Now we had talked a little bit about the idea of hips and knees, and that's something you hadn't thought much about before.
No, to be honest with you, not much at all. It's as I said to you before, Roger, that if I'm being honest, it really is just as soon as I hinge my hips back or get into the backswing of the snatch, I'm just exploding, right? And but as I mentioned to you, right, like if I were to think about it, yeah, I guess that's got to happen at the same time, essentially, in my opinion, right? If I'm going into that true vertical projection of force, I haven't looked at my video slow-mo to tell you if they come up first or not. Although I could probably tell you, having looked at a lot of my videos, it probably is my knees first and then my hips. But the intention was always just explode, essentially, right? Once I'm at the bottom, explode has always been my thought on that.
Okay. One thing that we had actually communicated that we might talk about this, and I want to bring it up just real quick. I'm of the opinion that how far back your snatch travels horizontally is going to largely be a byproduct of how your body works. Okay, you're going to have a certain, if you've got long legs, it's going to travel back a little bit farther, and you're going to get into individual muscle lengths. But when we get into the research, the problem is that this is swing research. It's not snatch research. But if we can say that the mechanics are similar, it's pretty conclusive that the hamstrings activate first when you load that bottom position. Hamstrings are going to activate first most of the time. You're bringing the bell back there. The snatch still does have some horizontal component. So as soon as the bell gets back there, you've got your stretch, shorten cycle. Boom, your hamstrings have to react. Now, how fast they come forward and your hips get over your knees is going to be determined again by the length of your legs. So if your legs are super long, it's probably going to take a half a beat, longer. So you're going to see someone like Jeremiah might have a very discernible hips knees, where you, Chris, or I might have hips and knees at the same time. But one thing that's super important to point out that I think is often neglected is that your strongest knee extensor is going to be your glutes. And we don't talk about that because, your knee extensors are your quads and on the front of the leg. But when your foot's in contact with the ground, your strongest knee extensor is your glute. And as soon as those glutes fire, when they co-contract with the quad, they need to be relatively in line. So if your knee goes first before your hips are over those knees, you're losing that synergy between the two muscles. You're firing your vertical projection into a body that's not quite there. And this is one of the problems with this really hinge dominant snatch, is it takes a lot longer. So the glute generally is going to come into the exercise a lot later. So you're going to get hamstring, then you're going to get roughly glute and quad at the same time. And that's when we really want to see everything kind of finishing at the same time. And they've done some interesting research about what contracts and when. They're starting to get a body of kettlebell research, even though there's still not much. So definitely the same time if it works. But you may have hip first, but you're not going to want knees then hips, because you're going to be missing out on either the co-contraction of the knee and the quad, or the knee and the hip. Or you're going to be bypassing hamstrings. And we want, in my opinion, I want as much free energy as possible. You've got this kettlebell coming down from the top, and you want to get back into the backside, get that pre-stretch and go the other way.
Yeah, it's a good point you bring up, Roger. And honestly, even just recently, the last 2 weeks, so Tim and I had taken two-handed swings out of my program for quite a while, 4 or 5 months. Prior to that, I was doing heavy two-handed swings with my press work 2 days a week. And I've made posts recently saying I will never do that again. Now, why I took it out was I was doing some long cycle work, which, as you guys know, long cycles, you're getting a lot of shit through the hips, right? So I was doing double long cycle work with 28s for 5 months. So in terms of weight coming through the hips, I had 56K coming through the hips, which is the same weight that I was doing with my two-hand swing. However, the technique and the intention behind them were totally different. So why I share this is because I feel like my snatch has actually gotten a lot more knee dominant than I actually would even like. And I think it's 2 reasons. Number one, I think it's because I did just start to snatch heavier as I got the technique down. I'm not a big guy. I'm like 166 pounds, 165 pounds, and can comfortably snatch the 40K for a training session. That being said, not having the two-hand swing to just remind my body that I do want to keep focusing on some hip dominant movements and horizontal projection of force, to have that ability to, as you said, Roger, know that my hamstrings are loaded, I'm going to fire right with my hips and have that to bring into the snatch. I definitely feel like I've lost some technical proficiency in my strength that side, to the point where I've even just this week played around with the 48K and just doing some breath, using my breath as a guide, my ability to control my breath. But I think it's crucial for a lot of the reasons you just said, because while maybe I couldn't pinpoint like what you just said, Roger, I could feel that that's not happening, and it wasn't always that way. When I had two-handed swings in my normal repertoire, that was there, and the two went really well together. Even though, again, you might not think, well, but this is horizontal. This was like, no, you're still strengthening the posterior chain. You're still utilizing a lot of that stuff to help you snatch better, right? I view the two-hand swing as an accessory lift to my snatch work, essentially.
Very cool. So you put them back in, and you're already feeling the positive.
Oh yeah,
okay.
Yeah, absolutely. They've been back in this will be the second full week, and I feel a big difference, and not even going as heavy as I was before. But I tell you what, I won't be taking it back out again. That's for sure.
So the basics work. Imagine that.
That's it.
You mentioned breath. Jeremiah has a breath question. Why don't you ask your breath question?
Yeah, actually, so I did see that you posted a little bit about your breath, and I'm going to ask this coming from somebody who may be watching this or listening to this that may not know. So talk about the regular breathing pattern you would use for just your general snatch. When is that coming? And then let's say I was working on endurance, say like a 5-minute snatch test or something of that nature. How are you adjusting your breathing for those particular scenarios as well? And what might be something people could take away with to get better at that?
Yeah, I mean, the breath is huge, honestly. I think you got to scale all the way back to even some of the breath work routines that I have prior to snatching. For the last, year and change now, I sleep with my mouth taped shut. I've been doing that since I read James Nestor's book last summer. That has been a huge game changer for me. As somebody who grew up with childhood asthma, chronic mouth breather, that just changed everything for me. Don't take allergy medicine anymore. Breathe through my nose much more proficiently and powerfully than I ever have before. To this day, since taping my mouth shut, I have not had a stuffy nose in over a year. I mean, literally don't get stuffy noses. And that's just from sleeping with my mouth taped shut. That also spills into training, obviously. So I always focus on nasal breathing during my rest sets. There's a couple things that I might go through mouth breathing if I am more out of breath than usual and need to kind of recover a bit more. But in training, this actually was even just shared most recently on our podcast with Pavel Matchek, and that'll actually be coming out tomorrow. We talked exclusively about breath, and he actually went over in that episode what he does in his entire training session, from swinging to rest periods for swinging, get ups, rest period with get ups, cool downs, all that. And it's really simple. It's a double inhale through your nose. So it is a, and reason being is that if you just take the first sniff, it actually constricts your nose. So you're not actually getting as much air as if you take a double sniff. The second sniff is where you actually get the expansion. And when you play around with it, it's actually pretty easy to see how that second sniff actually does get more oxygen more air into your lungs. So that's been the focus as of late. And then the focus prior to that was really just making sure I'm giving a hard exhale with my hips. A lot of the times, and I was really bad at this in the snatch, where I would go, all right, so at the top of my lockout is when I take my breath. Don't want to do that, obviously, because that's not where your power is at. You want to time your breath with where the power is at. So now, while I'm doing that, and I'm back here, then it's a, and the type of breath, I think, is maybe more important than how. It's not which is how I think most people are pretty much taught. That's how I was taught, at least, and how I snatched and swung for a while, was this. That's effective in the sense that it helps you create some intra-abdominal pressure, but it's not effective in what Pavel shared with us last week in the chemical exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. So instead of a sound, it's more of a like a coughing almost sound. And that is actually helping your body get rid of more CO2, and you actually will produce more power. Tim didn't go into detail with that with me a year ago when we talked about it. He kind of just had me play around with it and mentioned how this is how I want you to try to kind of express power through the hips when you're snatching is more of this. It sounds kind of like a cough, and it does make a big difference. So I've done it that way, but it wasn't until last Friday when we spoke with Pavel Machek where he kind of explained why from a chemical standpoint. And that really is where the benefit is, because as you guys know, I'm sure that chemically, if you don't, if you start to build up lactic acid, if you start to have that imbalance of carbon dioxide and oxygen, it's just, you're already on your way down, right? So to me, the simple math of it, the simple tactics of it is a double sniff on the way down, in your down snatch. So if I'm here, so I'm taking that second one as I'm going down, and it's a hard kind of coughing sound with my hips. And then that's where the low pull, I just kind of come up through here, right? As far as for snatch test, I really can't speak to it, man, because I don't do them.
Why not? You just hate them?
I hate them. I just don't like to do them.
Yeah, I'm with you, dog.
Now, that being said, it was in, I think, April of this year, I had to recert my level 2. So I had to do a snatch test, obviously. And it was really interesting because the 24K felt like a feather. I mean, I had been snatching the 32K for a year, had done a couple sessions with the 36K. Like, it felt like a baby weight. And my technique had never felt any better. And so I went to do it the first day because I did a video research with Brett Jones, and I was like, man, this is amazing. This feels like a 16K. But I didn't own my breath at all. And so I didn't, the first time I went to do it, I actually stopped like 2 minutes in. I was like, this fucking sucks. I don't want to do this right now. And so what it's kind of taught me and how I'm approaching my snatch sessions now is now I'm only using a bell that I'm snatching with that I know for that session, I can control my breath the entire time. So I'm actually treating my snatch sessions as breath sessions with a weight while snatching, if that makes sense, right?
Quick clarifying question. When you say control, if you can control your breath, what does that mean? Like, you don't need to switch out of nasal breathing, or what are your, okay.
Yeah. So the rhythm of that double sniff on the way down and that at the exhale, that is present the entire time. And while recovering, I can comfortably breathe through my nose and not need to, I don't feel exacerbated at all in that sense. That paired with the power still there, right? So depending on the length of my snatch session, I may go up and wait during the end or whatever the case may be, but I've got to make sure that my breath is on point first and foremost. Now I will say though, Jeremiah, that when I was doing some like longer sessions, because I would do some like sprints peppered in there, I actually would just close my mouth entirely and just breathe through my nose the entire time, because it's a little bit more efficient. That whole kind of that does take some energy out of you. So I would actually hold water in my mouth and do longer sets, controlling my breath through my nose the entire time. I didn't do any snatch tests that way. Again, because I don't like to do snatch tests. Maybe with this new approach that I have towards my snatch training, where it's all breath focused, I will get into more of the 5-minute stuff, the maybe even the Secret Service snatch test stuff. But to me, the more you get into that, anything beyond, basically, I do sets of 5 and 10 all the time. That's it, and mostly 5s. So we're looking at 10 seconds, 12 seconds worth of work, or at the most maybe 20 seconds worth of work, right? And I take longer rest periods as well. So I'm usually doing those every 75 seconds. If it's something like 10 reps, I'm doing them every 2 minutes. So a lot more rest than maybe typically just every minute on the minute type stuff, or even Q&D protocols where it's every 30 seconds for 4 rounds, right? But that I don't know if that kind of helps you at all there, Jeremiah. That was my.
I love it, man. I think there's some really solid takeaways, and when I would do longer snatch endurance stuff like the snatch test, I would try to hit some sort of double breathing component in there as well, where it would be a double breath on the way down, and then trying to do that. I'm really excited to, get to my training tomorrow and try some of those breathing techniques with the snatch, especially the double nasal breath, and just to see, and even that cough, just to see how that feels. I'm really excited. That's some solid gems right there, man.
Yeah, I mean, so to me, the double inhale, it almost slows it down a little bit, because if I know that at here I can take one inhale, but then I can take another one here, and know that second one's actually going to give me more of my breath, it can help me get into a bit more of a rhythm, where then it is kind of right? So like that tempo is really kind of, in my opinion, more ideal for, I mean, look, even that tempo, that would be a 5-minute snatch pace tempo if you didn't put the bell down and rest much. I mean, that would be acceptable. For me personally, that tempo is a lot slower than I typically would snatch. And it kind of gets back to some things that I've mentioned on the podcast lately. And I'm a pretty humble guy, so I have no problem throwing myself under the bus, and pretty much what I'm going to do right now. Now, I feel really good about my technique. I do not feel like I own my breath at all with my snatch training, which is why I've come to view my sessions with the intention of I'm doing this as a breath training practice, not a snatch training practice. Because if you could tell, proficiency wise, strength wise, power wise, technical wise, I know I can pass a snatch test. I know I could probably pass the Secret Service snatch test because the weight is not that heavy for me. But I couldn't do the latter, and the former is not fun because I don't own my breath. And if you don't own your breath, you really don't own much, because at some point you're going to have to muscle your way through whatever that may be. So a tip that I picked up from Iron Tamer Dave Whitley is actually, it is a snatch workout, but it's actually more of a breath workout. And it's basically a lot of holding the bell over your head and doing a breath ladder. But so I'm only ever going to do one snatch, but I'm going to hold up for one breath. I'll snatch again. Now I'm going to hold for 2 breaths. I'll snatch again. Now I'm going to hold for 3. And admittedly, I have not done this up to 10, which is what he said to do. And I only used 16K. It was enough to show me I don't know my lockout and I don't know my breath. Since then, I've played around a lot with the 16K. I now own the lockout a lot better, and it allows me to slow my snatch down during my training. Because I think a lot of times if people speed through it, inevitably their breath is going to be off probably somehow. And it might be not your breath. It could be that you don't own the lockout, or the weight's too heavy and you're just trying to, like, your body's signaling you to go faster because you don't, it's too much for you, whatever the case may be. But it kind of gets back to why I feel like if you're using the breath as the focal point, you have to make adjustments for where you're at right now, and maybe check the ego or whatever the case may be.
What's the mechanism? What are you training with the breath ladder at the top? Anything besides the lockout?
So again, I only did it up to about 6, and I was like, no, I don't want to do this. And I did do instead that day. I took a page out of master instructor Tommy Blom, because he was on the show the day before and shared with us his one, which is so 4 minutes of snatching straight. You're doing 12, but you're purposely only doing 12 to 13 reps per minute. So it's a slow pace, and you're alternating sides every 5 reps. So you're trying to be as anti-glycolytic as possible. You're using a light weight, and you're having to do these slow reps. Aside from owning the lockout, you will find that having the bell up here, you will be out of breath over time as you keep doing more reps. So it is, again, kind of promote more of that nasal breathing and just kind of overall control of your breath. The key, as both Tommy talked about and Iron Tamer Dave Whitley, is not sneaking in that extra breath when you go to drop the bell into the snatch or whatever the case may be. Trying to be really diligent at only taking the amount of breaths you're going to be taking. But to me, it was kind of twofold. The lockout was the biggest thing, because I can tell you, like, you might find right side, I could hang out here all day. Gotta have a sandwich, right? Here, it's like, oh shit, like I already feel like I don't really want to take a breath, right? So that, I think, was the biggest thing, but it will become harder to maintain your breath as you do more reps and over time. And I think Tommy's was, I think it was 4 minutes. You get a 1 minute rest, I think, and you do 5 rounds of that. I did it for 2 rounds, and again was like, that's good for today. I'm going to do my normal 5 reps every 75 seconds. Yeah,
let's dial it back. I mean, I guess it's also an exercise in grit, or to some extent, especially, coming from, Iron Tamer and all those things, just like that mental Zen aspect to it, I suppose.
Yeah, Tamer's awesome. He's the man.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any specific snatch questions that they want to ask Chris?
Yeah, Chris, I've been meaning to ask you this for a while there. I've noticed in your videos the angle of your feet. You have I would say a pretty decently wide stance, but then the angle of your feet is most certainly not straight ahead. Is that just a product of your anatomy, or is that something like you're intentionally doing?
So Chris, good to see you, by the way. I know we've gone back and forth on Instagram for quite a while.
No doubt, man.
The angle of my feet is intentional. I don't know when. It'd have to go back to, I don't know, years ago when it was like, hey, you need to have the ability to squat and do things with your feet straight, but like, it's not good. You're not ever going to be as strong and powerful as you will with your feet being externally rotated. Furthermore, you could actually do some damage to yourself if you're trying to produce force, strength, whatever, keeping your feet totally straight. So I want to say maybe it was back in like 2015, maybe. I did a seminar with Todd Bumgardner, and he really quickly kind of just had and I think Brett Jones talks about this too, kind of like the pop and lock, right? So you squeeze your glutes and you kind of just rock back and pick up your feet, right? And your feet just kind of go out where they're going to go out. That's typically about where I have mine. As far as my stance, I had more of a narrow stance before working with Tim, and he was the first person who's like, hey man, like go a little wider. And anytime I come into stuff like where I want to, I'm really going to dive into something, I'm like, cool, I'm just going to do what he says. And I did feel it was easier for me to access my hips. I felt more power. And furthermore, I noticed that I wasn't shifting my torso as much. I think just because simply I had more space between my legs to actually keep my shoulders square and reach and get the bell back between my legs. I've played around with it a bit in terms of even going wider. Not as much now, but early on, I found myself going back to more narrow. But basically, it's the feet. It is intentional, and the width is something that I did kind of work on over the last couple of years.
What tangible benefits have you seen?
So in terms of the stance,
yeah.
So definitely feel stronger overall. I noticed it was a bit more like the stance I would typically take if I was doing double bell work, but typically doing single snatch bell where the bell typically wasn't that big comparatively. I went more narrow. Plus, I was also using the mindset of, as I said before, I naturally have always been able to jump pretty high. So knowing that a lot of my power is with more of a kind of neutral, like hip width, like I'm not going to go jump with my feet super wide, right? I think I just carried that into a lot of my power training, right? Snatching, swinging, things like that. But I felt stronger in the hips. I felt more activation in the hips, definitely in the glutes, easier to access the hamstrings, as you mentioned earlier, Roger. And also just an overall easier ability to root myself into the floor. It just overall, I think things felt night and day better, which is funny because sometimes I guess unless you're told to make a change, you just keep doing things your way until you're like, oh, well, shit, there's a better way of doing this possibly, right?
Sure. What do you got, Rich?
Two things. First, going back to what you guys were talking about 10 minutes or so of the position of bending the knees a little bit more, right? And then getting a little bit more quads out of it. You could see, and I stalked your page while you were talking, Creep, that as the hips come through, now it's all good, bro, I know. As the hips come through, especially on the trajectory up, right? That the hips come through a lot quicker than most. And there's also this displacement of your upper body, which allows for such a taming of the arc. And on the way down, it's literally the reciprocal. It's the torso shifts back, the elbow can come down, and therefore hips and knees bend. But going back to your point of it not being a hip dominant movement or kind of the differentiation from what we're taught at certifications, it's a really good illustration of how the hips can come through. I mean to say that you perform this well enough to show that when the hips come through, there's this displacement of the upper body to allow and assisting in such a close angle of the bell. That's number one. Two, what are you thinking about? Somebody asked me this a couple of weeks about my snatch, and I thought I gave a good answer. I'd love to ask you, what are you thinking about on the way down of what the disassociation of your arm is doing before the upper body even moves, before anything else? So from lockout to about here, what are you thinking about?
That's a good question. So typically, when I've got the bell up here, I'm actually trying to whip it out in front of me and pull it back essentially. Now I do that a bit, like if you'll probably see from a lot of my side profile ones, my elbow pretty much goes straight back. Actually, I think Chris, it might have been you that were like, so you do a high pull, but at the top, right? And that is like, so couple of things. It doesn't sound like it would make sense. Tim calls it the grip and whip. Right. So if I'm trying to tame the arc, why would I whip the bell out in front of me? Reason is because you're gripping it, so it's actually not going to go out in front of you. It's actually going to pinch into the skin here in your palm, and it's actually going to take a little bit of your grip away. So it's going to kind of like pull itself, like roll over into your hand. And as soon as I have that, then I know I've got the bell here, and I can just wait and be patient and kind of and hinge back at that right moment, right? So at the top, it is that grip and whip motion. You mentioned kind of it looking like the same in reverse. Ideally, wherever I insert my hand on the way up is where I want to insert my hand on the way down. I don't honestly think about that a lot. I think a lot of times it's more of the grip and whip idea. If my elbow does not go back first from here, I don't have it, like the bell's just going to get away, right? In my experience. So if there's anything I'm thinking about at the top, it is trying to get that kind of rolling up on my hand feeling of the bell kind of just wedging into my palm more. Because again, now it's going to make sure that I have that deep grip at the bottom when I go to explode up in my snatch. Does that help at all, Rich?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. That grip and whip is interesting. I never thought about casting out in that manner, but yeah, I see it working for you, and I'm like, that's interesting. I like it a lot.
So keep in mind, like, so you don't want to, because you're not going to cast it out in front of you. Really, what you want to think about is like if you pick up a bell and you get it really deep in your palm here, it's going to be hard for me to kind of show you, but the handle should start to actually kind of create tension here in your palm, so that you really don't even need much of the actual grip itself. And when you go to flip it, the easiest way would, if I were to kind of like show you my hand at the bottom, it should still be pretty deep in my palm at the bottom of my backswing. So it might think like casting, but I actually don't really want the bell to go out at all. It's just to get it into my hand even more, essentially, right?
So you keep the bell here. At no point does it ever slide to the fingertips?
No.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That was something that took me a while to kind of get used to. Because again, as I said before, I typically would actually just kind of hook the bell with my fingertips. And then as I hiked it, I would close my thumbs. Okay. So all of my calluses were up here, and even some top of the fingers here. Now it's really like the palm is calloused, and even right here, especially on my right hand, there's a really thick one right here on my palm. I actually will even be a little bit more strategic on how I chalk my hands. Before, I used to only chalk like the top of my fingertips. Now I'll chalk my entire hand. And furthermore, like on my left, it does tend to get away from me a little bit more in the middle. I still want that callus more over here on the side. So I will only put chalk here on my hands because I want the bell to stick there, right? Anywhere you put chalk is where the bell is going to grab. So if I put chalk everywhere, like I only put chalk about here because I want to make sure that it grabs here on my hand. Bit of a learning curve. And I've always, just as a side note for grip stuff, like if I've got 100 reps planned for the day and at rep 40, I can feel my hips aren't there, stop. Like, cause you're going to tear your hand at some point. Like it's just a matter of time. As soon as your hips die out, the session's got to be over for snatching, at least.
I noticed something about your grip as well. And it was just in watching some of your videos, more so in the setup. So you're really like manhandling that bell initially. Is that just to get that deeper grip and to get that like underneath kind of arm wrestler grip kind of feeling that I best way I describe. I don't know if that's accurate, but real deep in there and just being able to like control it that way. So it starts out at that initial point. Is that
exactly
for that?
It is. Yeah. So I'm literally, when I go back and get set, I'm actually kind of punching down to the ground. I'm punching the bell down to the ground and wedging that handle up into my hand as much as I can. And then when I kind of bring it around, it just also helps me kind of like screw my lat into place. But that is why. So Tim, oh, go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say, so does it now with that, is it are you only able to do that with those competition style bells, or can you do that with the cast irons as well?
Yeah, no. So truth be, I hate snatching the competition bells. I really do. Like Tim challenged me to start doing them a few weeks ago, and I was like, so I did, and I was like, dude, I fucking hate this. I'm not doing these anymore. Like the cast iron bells, I actually find it easier personally. And that was kind of his challenge to me personally, was like, hey, show me you can do it with competition bells. And I could, it's just not as, I found myself fumbling. For me, the handles are skinnier, so it's a little bit harder for me to really get that deeper grip. It kind of slides out a bit more. Whereas for me personally, the cast iron bell is a little thicker handle. It just sits in the right place for me. So I do find it easier to get that. Now, if you're talking press and the clean, I love the competition bells because you can absolutely get a much deeper insertion in the bells, in my opinion. Based off of the boxier handle with the competition bells. I will get, when I'm pressing, like this morning I had a press session. I mean, that bell is pretty much resting, way down here on my forearm, right? It's through my hands, but I mean, I could bend my fingers backwards or whatever. The bell's not going to move because it's so deep into my palm. Again, I think it would be good for snatching then too. I think for me, I just prefer snatching the powder coat bells. But I can still get that deep.
Tim loves those competition bells,
Well,
long story about it.
Yeah, and there is, I mean, look, especially with the low pull, like when you get above 28K, they flip up on you much faster. So, one of the exercises that I'll use to teach the low pull is something called the elbow swing, where you're actually kind of doing a swing, but you're actually pushing the bell up, and that particular exercise is to help you really get that feel of the bell flipping up early and literally traveling vertical. And you get more of a feel for that with the comp bells. I think as you get heavier, 28K, 30, probably more 32K and heavier. But I still just prefer the powder coat bells myself, personally.
We have any other questions? We got a few more minutes.
I do. You look like a powerful guy. What do you do outside to train those qualities that allow for such a snatch to look like, to allow, to be as powerful as you are? You said you were an athlete your whole life. Do you kind of depend on that, or do you implement other things into your training program?
So I don't do much else to a fault. I had somebody message me the other day. It was like, dude, you're not getting pecs like that snatching. I'm like, I don't do anything else, man. Like, I literally, to a fault, Tim, I'm not, it's Tim. So I followed Tim's hardstyle method exclusively. There are accessory movements in there. Admittedly, I did not do them, and I told him that. I literally just snatched 2 days a week and did my clean and press and long cycle work 2 days a week, and that was it. I did zero accessory work. The 2-hand swing was the only other thing. And it worked. I got powerful. I got stronger. However, I would not, like, now I'm adding other things back in because I don't like the way my movements have become. It's almost like too minimalist. I'm adding a bit more of warm up into my mix. I am adding more accessory work. The pull-up bar behind me, that's new as of a couple months ago. So I also didn't do any pull-ups for a year. I didn't do any pulling in general for a year. Mind you, the snatch is a pull exercise. My upper back got a lot stronger in doing just straight snatching for a year. But I'm a minimalist at heart, so I'm always looking for how little can I do and how much can I get in return. So to answer your question, not much. Right now, currently, if you want to know, I'm doing 2-handed swings. I'm doing pull-ups, gorilla rows, Bulgarian goat bag swings, which I just use like my Rogue Strongman bag here for that. And then my other primary work is press work right now.
I got a question for you on your off arm during the snatch. I'm kind of obsessed with different strategies. What is yours?
Dude, it's so in terms of what I'm doing with the off arm?
Yeah, what are you doing? What's your intention? Does it change based on repetitions, based on loading?
It's a good question, man, honestly. And it's something actually that is a big part to the way I've learned how to snatch. And that is, so I'm purposely whipping my arm forward but not to generate momentum in the snatch. It's actually a cue for my hips to fire quicker. So one thing you can play around with is if you actually start to just focus on whipping the arm forward as quick as you know, that you'll notice that instinctively your hips fire faster. But there's a two-part to that. So not only am I trying to whip my arm forward, I'm also then whipping it backwards. And that times with my finish overhead. Okay. When I was snatching heavier bells, it was more natural because I actually kind of felt like I needed it. Mm-hmm. Like if you look at my recent videos, I really don't know that I'm doing it as much. It's not intentional. I would still like to be doing more of it. I think it's probably just more my focus now these days tends to be on my breath and can only focus on one thing at a time. Right. But the key is I'm using the arm as a here, and mm-hmm. the forward cues my hips. The backward is like at the top, more rhythm at the top of my snatch. As far as like fist or open hand, it's an open hand. I'm just kind of, chopping real quick, but I'm putting a lot of effort into that.
Are you trying to keep that angle?
You know what? I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm really just emphasizing. I'm viewing the arm swing as purely a trigger for my hips.
Okay, got it. I'm watching different people do this, and I actually reached out to Brett Jones the other day, and he's got his article, that he talked about with the off arm, and I noticed a lot of really big beefy guys. They like to keep the arm straight out to the side. And you'll see it move forward a little bit, but you don't quite have the same whip. I understand there's some physics behind it. Whether or not you want to add the momentum is up to you. But the idea of force summation, you will get more power. I get the neurological trigger, and that makes a whole lot of sense too. So you're going to get more power with the arm. And I don't know if at some point though, with certain body types, especially if you get like these real top heavy monsters, I don't know if at a certain point that arm becomes too much. It feeds rotation too much and it slows down the hips. So I'm really trying to find the sweet spot with using that arm to generate and then control force, because as you come down, as you put the brakes on with that arm, it's going to help you. It's going to help you one, stabilize your momentum. It's going to help you stop, but you're also going to probably get some. I imagine some across the back, you're going to get some stabilization to help your lockout be a little firmer. But I don't know, at a certain point, does it throw you off balance? And that's kind of a big question I've been wrestling with.
Yeah, personally, I haven't found that to be the case. And for comparison's sake, I mean, again, I'm 5'7", 165. Tim is 6 something. I mean, at one point he was like 250 pounds, 260 pounds. He's lost quite a bit of weight now, but big dude. He was ripping the hell into that opposite arm. But again, with the intention that it's firing his hips a lot faster. Sure. It never looked like it was throwing him off balance. And from my experience with it never threw me off balance. Just personal experience. Yeah. It never did seem to. I think more than anything, having more of a narrow stance threw me off balance, and using an inappropriate bell would throw me off.
Well, that's actually that's an awesome point, because not only are you making room for your hips, but as soon as you widen that base, you're providing yourself more stability. So if you can approximate the angle your arm's going to move at with your stance, then you're immediately going to slow down some of that rotation. I have a tricky time because my upper body is disproportionately bigger than my lower. I feel like I've got the upper body of a man and the lower body of a child. Just everything's just way too everything's way too narrow. So, but however, if I do widen my stance, it actually hurts. I can't widen very much. So I'm perpetually playing with this idea of rotation and body type. I'll try to go a little wider and see what that does. But we got to stop. I've got about 962,000 more questions, but
we may have to get a part two on here. We have to get a part two on here with you, Chris.
Sure.
I mean, there's just so much to digest, and I've never been more excited to go try snatching. So I'll be sure to tag you in my next snatch video I post. And man, we just can't thank you enough for coming on here, and everybody for being a part of the conversation and listening in. And make sure you check out make sure you check out the Breakthrough Secrets podcast. There's a ton of good guests, and obviously you'll get to hear some more from Chris. And yeah, you got anything else, Chris?
No, I mean, thanks for having us. Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it. It's something I'm super passionate about. Feel free to shoot me questions on Instagram, DM me if you got any questions. I'm happy to help out any way I can, and kind of just pass everything I'm learning forward to anyone who's interested.
Yeah, appreciate that.
We appreciate that.
All right. Thanks a lot. And thanks again, everybody, for joining. As always, we appreciate you, and stay strong.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Awesome.
So long,
Thanks,
everybody.
guys.